what is going to be the actual look of some of these towns that Keir Starmer says he wants to build. 12 very possibly going to be nominated before the summer. They're talking about 10,000 people living in over 100 different communities, if you like, over the course of time. It's on the front page of the Times this morning. We've been asking you for your views, and I think many of them have been very, very funny. Darren says this: considering the new towns are likely to be full of migrants, why not call them free gear two-tier towns? And Parker has sent me a very funny tweet, which I can't read out, but with some suggested names for some of the towns. Unfortunately, most of them can't be broadcast, but they are very good. One here from Rich in Dudley. I wonder if Starmergrad will have Red Hair Square right in the middle with sentry towers to keep an eye on the prisoners. Sorry, the residents. I mean, it does conjure up all sorts of humour, doesn't it? Basically, what he says is he doesn't like straight roads, apparently. He wants well-designed houses with plenty of variation. Starmer says a beautiful home is hard to define, but well-designed and led by the community. I just see a vision of kind of, you know, rainbow streets and cycle lanes and ULEZ cameras, CCTV, you know, Lord Alley's free gear, clothes shop. Let's talk to Paul Shamplina, founder of Landlord Action. He's got something to say about this, I'm sure. Paul, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Starmergrad is the preferred name for these places that he wants to build. I mean, obviously, we're being slightly tongue-in-cheek about it, but I do worry that the government is getting as closely involved as this in building projects because, you know, building projects might not be perfect and there might not be the number of construction workers we need to build them. But do we really want the government sort of this closely connected to it?
Actually, I would say most probably yes, Mike, actually, because we've had years and years and decades of poor house building numbers. I mean, last year alone, Mike, there was only 5,995 social houses built. Yeah. So we have a massive problem. I mean, obviously, we know about, obviously, the cost. I mean, the average cost of a property in London is 672 grand alone. But you touched on it, is the skills, the workforce. I mean, the association, the Home Builders Federation have said, I mean, I just took a note of the skills that they need: 20,000 bricklayers, 2,400 plumbers, 8,000 carpenters, 20,000 ground workers, 1,200 tilers, and you know, Starmer's saying, well, we'll get them as apprentices, right, you know, and we're not going to use migrant workers. So that's going to be the biggest challenge, of course.
Right. Well, Jackie Smith said just the other day there aren't enough construction workers. She made it very clear and said basically we're going to miss the targets that we've set for ourselves already. Because presumably, I mean, one of Starmer's promises is that he's going to give contracts to developers who will promise to train the people to do the jobs. Now, that sounds to me like it's going to take quite a long time. I've got a tweet here from a guy called John in Derbyshire. He says they're building 500 houses here, and the agent informed me that due to resources and skilled people, it will take 5 years to build 500 houses. Well, that's not quick enough, is it?
No, it's not going to happen. It will not happen. I actually agree that the planning laws and cutting out all the NIMBY, fight against applications needs to happen. But obviously we have a growing population, plus 70 million, and I think that they reckon by the end of the decade there's going to be 2 million people on council wait lists. There's 1.3 at the moment. So we have a desperate need of housing. And I understand that there's something like 100 applications have gone in from councils. But the reality is, last year alone, there was only 45% of those councils that actually did any building. Right. So there's been decades and decades of non-building, which is the problem, Mike.
And councils are going to say now that they've got no money. They'll say, well, we've had to put the council tax up, but we're basically bankrupt, so we're not going to be making any new building projects either.
It's horrendous. The councils are skint. I mean, last year alone in social housing, repair complaints went up 330%, as per the Housing Ombudsman. It's a massive problem. I mean, I've lived and breathed housing, and more so in the private rental sector, Mike, and obviously affordability is a massive issue. But you've just got to look at some of those social housing conditions, and obviously Awab's law, that poor little boy in Rochdale that died. Yeah. So I'm all for more building, and we need more building, we need more housing. But the reality is you ain't going to build 1.5 million properties in 5 years. That ain't going to happen.
No. And also, where are they going to identify all these 100 areas across England, right? Apparently some of them have applied to build towns of more than 10,000 people. But, you know, London, certainly in the southeast, doesn't really have much room for anything. And there are plenty of places around the country that you could find spaces in, I'm sure. But, you know, people need to also work where the jobs are. So there's no point in building, you know, 10,000 homes or 2,000 homes or 3,000 homes in a place where there isn't any work.
Well, that exactly. But you need infrastructure. You know, it's not just building; it's the infrastructure, it's the businesses. I mean, the businesses and the construction companies have said, one with regard to the skills force, trying to get people in to actually carry out the work. What's happened, because obviously, you know, the mortgage rates went up, and obviously they're trying to keep inflation down. You've had a lot of, you know, the big 6, big 7, big developers that are land banking, where they're holding on and they're not building. You know, the reality is it's great in principle, but of course you'd have obviously country objection with regard to building on greenfield sites. They're looking at brownfield sites, which are basically sites that have been partly or previously developed, but some of them have pollution on them. So it's a massive task. Actually, in some respect, you know, we look at what happened under the Tories in 14 years, and how many times did a Prime Minister say we're going to build 300,000 homes in a year? It never ever happened, Mike.
No. Well, Sadiq Khan's currently on notice that he's supposed to be building something like 150,000 houses, and he's only built about 2.
Well, yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me. But I mean, I think with regard to what they were looking at areas around tube stations, transport for London. You know, I get the amount of interviews I've done over the years relating to planning and house building. Yet we need more house building. We need more towns. It's going to take a long time. And I think, you know, in principle, it's great, but it's about practicality and, you know, how many apprentices are actually going into the building trade. I'd like to know that as well, Mike.
Well, that's a good one as well. What about Nansledan? Have you been down there? What do you make of that place?
No, I'm thinking about going there my summer holidays. That's in Cornwall, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what it's about. I've never been there. I mean, I've seen the other place. I think is it Charlbury or somewhere in Gloucester that was sort of designed by King Charles.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, that's where they've got the inspiration from. I think it's great. And I think, you know, the quality of our housing, if you think about especially the social housing and the council stock, it's really, really old. And it's actually most probably the worst stock actually in Europe, I've read, actually. So I think you can take inspiration for some of these towns. But, you know, you've had 100 applications from councils. They're going to need government money. Yeah, that's the key, government money. And we'll wait and see. But the problem is, what happens when you have one of these towns popping up near you, and who's going to move to those towns? But I mean, affordability is a big issue, obviously, at the moment.
Well, I get the impression it's all going to look like one big sort of set from the Truman Show, if it's got anything to do with the government. And of course, the government doesn't have any money. They've got our money, and they can spend it. They can borrow money, but they haven't got any money of their own. I mean, Rachel Reeves just put this tweet out this morning, right? For too long, politicians have accepted an economy that has failed working people. I won't. By taking on the blockers to get Britain building, investing in infrastructure and removing barriers to growth, we're going further and faster to get more pounds in people's pockets. I mean, it's just rubbish, isn't it? It's completely
I did an interview on Ian's show about working people, and obviously, you know, I'm a landlord and I represent landlords, and the big conversation was, well, landlords aren't working people. Well, they most definitely are. They supply housing. So look, I'm all for more housing, practicality. Affordability is really, really important. Our stock's really old. You know, the average rent in London alone is like £2,500 a month. So it is an issue, and affordability for renters, first-time buyers, and of course you've got to make sure the interest rates are kept down and inflation's kept down.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to be right in saying and predicting that this is all just pie in the sky, absolute and utter cobblers, and like most of the things that come out of this government's mouth, isn't likely to ever come to fruition. Paul, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Paul Shamplina, founder of Landlord Action.